The Senator for Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. For generations, manufacturing was the lifeblood of communities across Ohio and throughout the country. It was heavily unionized, the jobs paid well. It's not a coincidence that those two things go together. We know carrying a union card means better wages, better health and retirement benefits, and more control over the worker's schedule. These jobs allowed generations of Americans to build a middle-class life, but beginning in the 70s and 80s, we stopped making things in this country. Look at places like my hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. I went to Johnny Appleseed Junior High School, Mansfield Senior High School. I walked the halls with sons and daughters of auto workers from GM and machinists from Ohio Brass and electrical workers from Westinghouse and rubber workers from Mansfield Tire and hundreds of the sons and daughters of people in the building trades, laborers and pipe fitters and carpenters and millwrights and painters and one trade after another. Companies like Westinghouse and Tappan Stove all closed down one after another. Go to any town in Ohio and throughout the industrial Midwest, people can name a similar list. We know what happened. Corporations in Ohio shut down production in Mansfield, my hometown, or Lorain, where I was today, or Youngstown, or Cincinnati, or Toledo, in search of cheaper labor, in search of right-to-work states, in search of weaker workers' compensation or unemployment benefit laws, and moved to Alabama, and moved to Tennessee, and moved to Arkansas. And then that wasn't quite good enough. Then those same corporations lobbied Congress for trade agreements and tax treatment. So they then moved on to Mexico, and that labor wasn't quite cheap enough, and then they moved on to China. Ohio's paid the price for years in the form of lost jobs and lost opportunity. Now, Mr. President, and I know what you've seen in the state of Maine, you understand this, the whole country pays the price. Higher prices, supply chain delays, losing entire high-tech industries to our competitors like China. Look where we've ended up. In Ohio, and Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Today, 99% of LED bulbs are made in China. America invented the semiconductor. 40 years ago, the U.S. produced half the world's semiconductors. Today, it's 10%. 75% is made in East Asia. Look what happened. During the pandemic, companies across Ohio and the rest of the country shut down production lines, not because there wasn't demand. They shut down production lines, they laid off workers because they couldn't get enough semiconductors. Whether you're Ford in Lima, Whirlpool in Clyde, Ohio, Kenworth in Chillicothe, Navistar in Springfield, you need these chips. It's why the Senate must fund the Bipartisan CHIPS Act. We agreed to authorize this program. Now it's time to move and to fund it. At the end of January, Senator Portman and I flew to Columbus to join Intel to announce the largest ever domestic investment in semiconductor manufacturing. It will create 10,000 good-paying jobs. Union tradespeople, 5,000 union tradespeople for 10 years will build this facility. Think of the magnitude of that. As we were flying in on the plane, I remember sitting with the Secretary of Commerce and Senator Portman and my friend Don Graves from Cleveland, the number 2 guy at Commerce. And I looked out and I said, today in Ohio, we're finally burying the term Rust Belt. It's possible because we're on the verge of passing this historic investment. The EU, China, Taiwan, South Korea, all are providing incentives to make these chips domestically. None of them require stock warrants, as this motion would have us do. That's why I oppose this motion. Other countries are mimicking what we're doing already. The EU figures if Congress doesn't move quickly on the CHIPS Act, they're ready to begin to work to attract, they're already trying to attract that business there. In the history of the United States, the only time we've ever required equity warrants from private companies is during times of war or moments of financial and global crisis. It's not a bailout, it's an incentive. This motion to instruct conferees is well-intentioned. It won't work. It will make the U.S. program less competitive. It's likely to cause these companies to make these chips overseas where they can get the same incentives without those strings. I understand Senator Sanders' goal. It's a goal I share. I know that I just spoke with a presiding officer who neither of us have a particularly favorable attitude towards what we've seen with stock buybacks and the damage that it's done to our economy and what it's meant to undermine companies' investment in their workers and on new product lines. I have had I don't know, 6, 8, 10, 12 calls with the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, asking him, pleading with him about restricting some of the stock buybacks at some of the largest American banks, especially during the pandemic. So, as I said, I understand Senator Sanders' goal. We've got to make sure the jobs we create are good paying ones where workers can build careers. That's why in the CHIPS Act, we require that CHIPS funding go to the construction or modernization of U.S. facilities to support American jobs. We required CHIP applicants to make commitments to workers and community investment. We required CHIPS projects be sustainable without additional federal funding. These are initial federal investments that generate long-term, well-paying jobs. In both the Senate and House competition bills, we also require CHIPS recipients to pay the prevailing wage to employers or contractors. That's why the United Auto Workers supports this position. They support CHIP funding. It's why the building trades support CHIPS funding, opposing this Sanders motion. I can tell you from experience, if we drive these semiconductor jobs away, the alternative is not a replacement with other similarly high-quality jobs. Ohio's had that promise too often. Drive around Ohio, you'll see the alternative to low-wage, anti-union big-box stores where workers have little control over their schedules and little power to build a better life. It's also important to remember this investment isn't just for semiconductors. It will affect smaller supply companies and their supply chains. It will affect all the downstream industries that rely on these chips for all kinds of productions, appliances, auto, energy deployment. Our clean energy independent future is going to rely on American-made semiconductor chips. And Mr. President, I want to talk on one other motion that will be made in the next 48 hours on this floor to the CHIPS Act. We need to make more in this country. We shouldn't be taking other actions either that discourage domestic production. I urge my colleagues to oppose a motion to instruct that supports a broad exclusion process for 301 tariffs for goods from China. Those tariffs are in place because China unfair trade practices targeting our industrial base and Ohio jobs. The AFL-CIO opposes it. The United States Trade Rep Office opposes it. She was confirmed here in a unanimous vote. The Alliance for American Manufacturing opposes it. They know that any removal of these tariffs needs to be part of a broader strategic approach to trade policy with China. We can't let China undermine the investments that American manufacturers make in workers and communities here in the United States. If we do this bill right, it will mean we finally make more in America. It will begin bringing back the supply chains back to our country. It will help us bury the term Rust Belt once and for all. When you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work. That's what the CHIPS Act is about. It's about workers. It's about good-paying jobs. It's about increasing the unionization of workers in this country. It will lift all boats. I yield the floor.